What's up guys, my name is Josh, and today I'm going to be comparing the HE560 versus the M1060. Hifiman versus Monoprice. So this is going to be probably a long video, so if you want a guide to skip anywhere in particular in this video, go ahead and skip here. Now, why am I comparing these? You might be thinking to yourself, well, these really aren't comparable. I mean, yeah, they're both partially made of wood, they both are plain on magnetic. And the reason why I'm comparing these is because they are so different. They represent kind of two different sides of the audio industry. And I found not only the physical comparison to be very similar in terms of how they're built, the materials that they're built with, the general design, but I want to also isolate some of the benefits and drawbacks of each type of sound signature, because one is kind of more fun, more pleasant, and the other one is going to be more of a reference, something that is going to measure a little bit more evenly, be a little bit more neutral, that sort of thing. And another thing with the HE560s is they actually started out life as a $900 pair of headphones, and that's quite substantial. That isn't cheap by any standards. Right now you can find it about $500 on Amazon, and if you look at a few sites here and there, they kind of go in and out of stock, but sometimes you'll be able to find them for about $300. Why would you compare a $900 or a $500 pair of headphones to a pair of M1060s? Well, this comparison is assuming that they're going to be approximately the same price, either used or if you get a really good deal on them. So I'm taking a little bit of liberty there. Now let's go ahead and get on to build and comfort and compare these two. For pretty much both, except for one issue with the Hifimans, the Hifiman is going to take both. It's made with this beautiful ebony wood. The cushions are slightly angled and small. The pads are perforated leather on the inside, and then what feels like genuine leather on the outside of the pad. The headband is thicker than the M1060s. The HE560s run about 375 grams. The M1060s are about 500 grams. The Hifimans are significantly lighter and significantly more comfortable. Now there are two build quality issues that I want to point out for both headphones. One, on the M1060, the wood on some units has been known to crack, especially if you go into a very humid or a very dry area. I moved from California to Washington back in November with these. It didn't seem to be an issue for me, but that's just one use. On the HE560, they kind of have a different issue where the armband is actually made of plastic and has been known to easily break. Now this particular unit already had that happen with the owner. He emailed Hifiman within one email. They were able to get a new arm to him and he was able to replace it. I'm not sure if it cost him anything or not, but pretty quick response time and it seemed to fix the issue. So continuing with the theme of these cost $300, the build for either doesn't really particularly stand out. It's not considered really impressive. The Hifiman kind of uses pretty liberal amounts of plastic throughout the entire build, and the problem with the M1060 is that even though it's mostly made of metal, it's very heavy, and all of the parts, they work, but there's just refinement issues that haven't really seemed to happen. The metal grills don't line up exactly with the wood, and sadly neither feel as premium as they could. Okay, so now let's talk about the power requirements for each of these. The HE560 is significantly harder to power than the M1060. The impedance for the M1060s is about 50 ohms. The impedance for the HE560s is about 45 ohms. Now that number is pretty similar. Where it's not similar and what does make the biggest difference here is going to be the sensitivity level. The M1060, it's about 96 decibels. On the 560, it's 90 decibels. And that doesn't sound like a huge jump, but when you're talking about sensitivity, that's quite a bit. On a Magni 3 on high gain, this is how far I have to turn the dial to loud for the M1060s, and this is how far I have to turn the dial to loud for the HE560s. You're gonna need at least a Magni 3 to power the HE560s, whereas the M60s are pretty much happy with almost everything. I mean, I can run them off the Full-Etude just fine. It's a $100 DAC amp, pretty cheap. And I haven't had any issues with it. Okay, now let's talk about sound. What are the sonic differences? Because that's kind of where these start to butt heads a little bit. Both have peaks about the 4 to 5K area, to be honest. My pair doesn't, but I know that is an issue with the stock M1060s that you get. The M1060s is more of a ringing, whereas the peak on the 560s is not so much of a ringing, not so much as a sibilance, more just like a emphasis of brightness almost. Although the highs in general overall is definitely going to go to the 560s. It's more clear, it's more well represented, it's very predictable, very pleasant, and nothing's really offensive, even though it is a bit peaky in that 4 to 5K area. It wasn't necessarily something that bugged me a lot. Now with the M1060s, what you get is a little bit more control of the highs. They're brought down a little bit. They're not quite as bright and out there. They're still very clear. I don't want you to think that the highs on the M1060s are bad, because I actually think they're really, really good. Just if I had to give it to one, I'm definitely going to give that to the 560. Okay, for the mid-range, that is definitely going to go to the Monoprice. And the reason why is because the HE560 has a significant lack in detail in the vocal ranges in the mid-range. Unfortunately, there's no texture anywhere there. It's just a smooth overlay, and it's not smoothness like the HD 600 and 650 deliver. It's more smoothness out of a lack of detail and a lack of clarity rather than a tonal issue. And on the Monoprices, it's rich, it's textured, it's got power and all the vocals and all the mid-range, including instruments, and it has really amazing separation for not only vocal separation, but instrumental separation within that mid-range. There's one caveat to this where the HE560, for whatever reason, is very textured with horns, cellos, violins, pretty much all strings. It's very, very good with orchestral music, and for whatever reason, the horns and the strings tend to be a lot more detailed than the vocals, especially in the mid-range. So if you listen to a lot of classical, I'm gonna recommend the HE560s for mid-range, but overall, I'm gonna recommend the M1060s. Low end, again, this one is gonna go to the M1060s, because with the HE560s, it's present, but there's no impact. And I'm a person who likes bass. I like to feel it. I love the impact. I need it when I listen to my music. If it's not there, I feel like there's something seriously lacking. Now, that isn't to say that it's not detailed in the 560. It just doesn't have the same impact, doesn't have the same clarity, doesn't have the same low-end grunt that I really look for, and that is more present on the M1060 by a substantial margin, actually. A good song to test really, really low-end is Interlude by Yoshi Hirakawa. I definitely recommend that one. Whew, it's getting a little hot in there. Okay, so for imaging and soundstage, this one's gonna be kind of flip-floppy because both have benefits in the opposite categories. For soundstage, the M1060 is significantly wider, a lot closer and more intimate sounding both in your head and a lot further sounding outside of your head. The HE560 is not wide at all in comparison, but it does have much, much better imaging within the soundstage that it's provided. It's a lot more pinpoint accurate. Not only is it more accurate left to right than I consider the M1060 to be, but it's a little bit more precise too. So if you really like imaging, if you value that over soundstage, the HE560 is gonna win. But if you prefer soundstage, you prefer something a little bit wider, sacrificing a little bit of imaging, not much, but a little bit, then the M1060 is the way to go. So now I'm gonna mention some things that I found notable, both good and bad for each headphone. Let's start with the HE560. There's an overall kind of haze or veil to the sound. And it wasn't extremely intrusive. It's not something that I feel like it was a game breaker, but it was just something that it felt like there was a barrier between me and the sound, and it wasn't significant. It was like a really thin veil over it. And especially A/B comparing the HE560 and the M1060. As soon as I would put on the M1060, it was like a breath of fresh air. It just felt alive and open, and everything was like clear as day. Now, a huge benefit to the HE560 over the M1060 is that the 560 is a lot more neutral. It is a little bit brighter. It's a more bright headphone. I would consider the M1060 a little bit warm, at least in comparison. And so if you want an absolute reference, flat sound signature, flat frequency response type of headphone, the HE560 is gonna be the way to go between these two. If you want something that's intense and hits with authority and has aggressiveness and a little bit of flavor, a little bit of fun to the sound signature, the M1060 is gonna be your headphone. Now, that's not to say that the M1060 is not considered neutral, because it's a lot more neutral than a lot of headphones out there. It's not the most neutral, obviously, but it's also not horrible. But it's definitely a little bit more flavorful than the HE560. Now with the M1060, what you're gonna get is more detail in almost every range except for the very, very high end. Think hi-hats, violin, the upper limits of female vocals, and certain like orchestral, really loud tracks. And that brings me to a really big benefit, depending on what type of music you listen to for the 560. The 560 has absolutely sweet and textured and detailed horns, cellos, and pretty much all strings really. It's just so well represented on this headphone. The M1060 has a little bit more of the bass frequencies that get produced by a lot of orchestra music, but I felt in terms of which one I preferred for classical, for orchestral, for instrumental music, I actually preferred the HE560s a little bit more for certain tracks. But something that the M1060 does win over for those live, huge classical recordings, the 1060 has just so much larger of a sound, but this is really gonna come down to what you prefer in a headphone. Do you want the vastness or would you prefer a little bit more intimacy? Now, huge benefit and part of why I like doing what I do is that on both headphones, there were certain tracks that I haven't heard played any better on any other headphone. That goes for the 560 and the 1060. Each one had tracks that just were immaculate. They were amazing. So on to the conclusion. Which one do I prefer? Which one would be a winner? For my taste, for what I like, the M1060. I'm sure a lot of you already saw that coming, but I just kind of wanted to run through the paces there. The reason why is I like the attack of this headphone. I like the aggressiveness of this headphone. I like the visceral approach that it takes. I like the flavor. I like the fun of it. In most ranges, it's more detailed. It's more revealing. It's significantly easier to power. The 560 has its kind of area of expertise though. It's not a bad headphone. And if you're going for that absolutely flat, I consider it somewhat boring sound signature that just measures well and does exactly what's expected all the time, then the 560 might be the way to go. My biggest problem with the 560 was that I was left wanting more. I wanted something a little bit extra and it wasn't giving it to me. All right guys, I think that's gonna wrap it up. Links as usual are down below to both headphone and Perry app down below, as well as Patreon. And I wanna give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. I simply, words cannot describe how it makes me feel that somebody would value my opinion enough to financially back it up. And it really does mean a lot. And the fact that a program like that exists for creators like me and for viewers like you to use, I think is just amazing. And the world we live in, man, the world we live in, it's crazy. I also want to give a huge shout out to the guy who sent these in, as well as a pair of HC660s, which I'm not sure if the review is coming out before or after this. Anyways, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. All right, guys, until next time, my name is Josh. Thank you very much for watching. I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.